Hi everyone, I hope you're all safe and well. I just thought I'd do a quick video lecture on the law of contracts. I've been recently getting in some submissions and yes, I need to, I think, address a few points to ensure that people are on the right track. So first of all, I'm going to start with the strategy. It's important, it's always important because it's a good base to review everything. As you may remember, the first part of the strategy is to understand the requirement. Now, we've been over the lecture brief a couple of times in class, but more importantly, I have given you an essay structure, which is really, if you follow that, that is a requirement. And what I'm starting to see from some of the admissions coming in is people aren't following that, so they've missed this point. And this really what this video lecture is about. It's going to go through that structure again, very direct, very clear, and I want people to follow it precisely because we don't have time to mess about and to go off on our own little tangents. We need work in that can be marked at a good grade, and so we can move on to our next topic. There's still a lot of things to cover. We may be doing this from in these types of video lectures, so we need to get this stuff done quickly. And I feel that whatever happened in the lectures, either people were messing about on their phones as usual, not paying attention, but a lot of people that are submitting stuff are not addressing the structure that we put down in class. Okay, gathering information, it's all on Moodle. It's in this video lecture, it's in the other lectures that are on Moodle as well. You don't really have to gather too much information. Of course, it does help to do your own research. Understand, connect, and consolidate. Law of contracts is a tough one. We know that. That's why I've given the essay structure. That's why I've given the opportunity for you to just send it to me for me to look over it first as well. It's not an easy one to understand, connect, and consolidate, but we need to try our best, and just following that structure might help. And finally, deliver the content. This is what I'm seeing at the moment. There's a focus on the kind of Wikipedia style explanation of what a contract is. There's a lot of plagiarism. I'm seeing people upload stuff that's above 50 or 60% plagiarized, and when I look at the work, it's really a point by point explanation of a contract, the elements. These things need to be included, but very briefly. There's no real application to the scenario, so that's where people are going wrong, and that's what this video about is. We need to avoid that, and that's what we're doing now. We're reviewing what some people have already submitted in the hope that we can all improve together. Okay, so let's get straight on. This is what we're going to be covering. Let's take a quick look at this concept of idea. It's very important. As we know, it's important to identify. Now, this particular acronym is used when doing law assignments, but it's still pretty much valid for any other assignment you might be doing. And it's important to identify, first of all, the issue or concept that is relevant and that needs to be addressed. This really fits with understand the requirement, understand what is being asked of you, and immediately identify that issue. The next stage is to define and explain. I just put these two together. I don't think they need separating because it might complicate things. But if you are you've identified what you need to, then you need to define and explain it. And we're going to obviously apply this in a moment, and that will make it more easily to understand. And then apply. This is very crucial, because otherwise it looks like a lot of people have just copied and pasted from some internet page or Wikipedia even. There's no application. And that is a dead giveaway to any lecturer. We need to see you applying it to the scenario and also to the case law that's been discussed. So it's very important when you're applying it, it needs to apply to case law, which we're going to look at in a moment, but also most importantly to the scenario. Some people have just decided just to mention the scenario right at the end. They've talked about offer, acceptance, with no application whatsoever, and that is a big mistake. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. In fact, let's start now. Paragraph 1. Like all assignments, you need a nice introduction. You need to warm the reader up, give the reader an idea of what the assignment's going to be about. And I mentioned this in class before, we need a good definition. The assignment is about the law of contract. Contract is the theme. Let's define it. And let's mention the 4 elements that make a valid contract. You know, we know it's offer, acceptance, consideration, and intention to be legally bound. It's those four elements we know. We only need to mention them briefly here, and in fact for this assignment, task 1, we're only going to focus on offer and acceptance. We're not going to touch the other two until we get to task 2, but they do need to be mentioned in the introduction. And I'd like to see one paragraph, and people might think, oh, well, that's going to be a long paragraph, but no, it's going to be a full paragraph. A full paragraph means that you've written with some depth, and if there's depth, it's demonstrating understanding. I've seen people start their paragraphs with, you know, a quote about what the contract is, you know, it looks like a small sentence, and then onto another paragraph to explain one of the element, and then onto another one. It just looks messy. One full paragraph for all of these points I'm going to mention now. Okay, because this is we're a business students, we're not law students, we want to make sure that we bring the business element into it. So very quickly you mention why contracts are so important to business, and we mentioned this in class. You know, we need certainty in business, it's very important, and a contract provides that. So definitely touch on that point. Give us some quick examples of where a business you know, has contracts, even things like employment contracts. Just mention a few. You don't need to explain exactly what they do, but just say, you know, there's a lot of important contracts that help run a business. For example, a service agreement, a contract, or you know, if you're recruiting staff, to have an employment contract. And then very briefly explain the scenario. You know, that Bob is selling a stamp. He's used the method of advertisement or advertising the stamp in the local newspaper. He's had some interest from a buyer. But as things progress, things go wrong, and then there's a question of whether Bob has breached a contract, and this is what the assignment's going to be about. So let's apply the IDEA acronym straight away. So it's important to identify the issue involving this scenario. So that means you're not going to be identifying, you know, consideration or intention to be legally bound, because this isn't the issue that needs to be identified within this scenario. That's for task 2. Okay, so we need the first element we need to identify immediately, of course, is offer. And once we've done that, we then need to define and explain what offer is. Of course, mentioning things like the two other parties involved and explaining the different sides of the party, as you see there. But the most crucial part is to talk about how an offer can terminate, because this is very relevant to the scenario. And as you can see, there's 4 areas or 4 reasons why an offer can terminate: a lapse of time, revocation, rejection, and death. And just by looking at that scenario, you know that no one's died, so we can scrap death. And really, I know there is an issue of time there. There's a time condition put in, but it isn't really related to lapse of time. So death and lapse of time can be ignored now. The idea now is, when you move to the apply part of the acronym, is to apply the idea of revocation and rejection to you know, the utopian stamp scenario you see here. And I think the phrase "it could be argued" is very useful. So you might focus in on, for example, rejection. Now, another word for rejection, or another explanation of rejection, is something called a counter offer. So you look over at the scenario and you see that obviously Bob's original offer is £750, but Alan makes a counter offer. So if he's making a counter offer, therefore he is rejecting Bob's offer. So it could be argued that by rejecting Bob's original offer, there's no contract. So it could be argued, therefore, that Bob is not in breach of any contract, because no contract was ever activated because Alan made a counter offer, which is you know, a form of rejection. Okay, so you need to focus in on that. You could also mention this idea of revocation, coming from the verb to revoke. Bob sent a letter, you know, towards the end of the week, revoking his original offer to Alan. So these things need to be mentioned because it shows that you understand revocation and rejection, and it shows that you're able to apply it to the scenario. So very important you do that. And using this phrase, it could be argued, means that you're arguing from a certain point of view, but you're not actually making your final argument or your final conclusion yet. You'll do that at the very end. Okay? So that's paragraph 2. Now let's look at paragraph 3. And the way to move on to paragraph 3, if you like, is you could also mention this idea that an offer must be distinguished from an invitation to treat, and that then leads you nicely into paragraph 3, which is about invitation to treat. So you've identified that now as being the issue. So now obviously you need to explain or define and explain what an invitation to treat is. Talk about the fact that it's an advert, exhibition of goods. It could be an auction, and then it's very important here to apply. In this case, you can apply it to case law, and on Moodle we have stuff about Partridge versus Crittenden. We spoke about it in the lecture as well. So you need to talk about that particular case law and how it set a precedence for this idea of invitation to treat. And once again, throw in that lovely phrase towards the end of paragraph 3. It could be argued. Okay, so obviously once you've done the research, you'll know that if it is an invitation to treat, it could be argued therefore that it's not an offer, and therefore there's no chance for acceptance and all the other elements, and therefore to make it a valid contract. So it could be argued that once again Bob has not breached any contract because it's an invitation to treat, and that would finish off paragraph 3, which is focused on the invitation to treat, very nicely. And then to paragraph 4, once again using the IDA acronym, you identify the issue here, and the issue of course is acceptance. Does acceptance take place? Before you look at that, of course, define, explain what acceptance is about. Mention the rules around communicating acceptance as well, and then there's an opportunity to apply both in terms of the case law and of course the scenario. So you're looking at the different issues where acceptance may have taken place. So we know that there's telephone calls and messages left, but most importantly we know about this idea of the postal acceptance. This is the crucial element when it comes to paragraph 4, focusing on postal acceptance. Take a look at the case law, Feldhaus and Brindley, because Alan has sent a letter saying that he's accepting Bob's offer of £750, and according to the postal rule, as soon as you put that letter into one of those big red postal box, that's when the contract is activated. So you can need to look at that. Once again, you can then argue, it could be argued that there is a valid contract because of Alan putting a letter into a post box accepting Bob's offer. So you're arguing now from the other standpoint, from Alan's point of view, and this is what's good, because you're showing the reader that you're developing your understanding of the scenario, and you're applying there's elements you're applying there: offer, acceptance, invitation to treat. You're demonstrating your knowledge and understanding of this, and that's great. You've covered those things in the first 4 paragraphs, and then finally paragraph 5, your closing argument, your summary if you like. And because you've mentioned so many things, you might want to reintroduce or introduce the overriding question again, which is really about, does Alan have a case against Bob for breach of contract? That's really what this whole assignment's about. And you might want to quickly summarize the arguments that you've already presented in regards to offer, where maybe you said that there isn't a case, or invitation to treat where there isn't a case of breach of contract, and then there was the acceptance part where there could be a case. And this is now where you get a chance to give your opinion. In conclusion, I believe that Bob has or hasn't breached a contract. This is where you decide. And as I've mentioned many times in the lecture, there's no right or wrong answer here, as long as you give a conclusion and give your reasons. So when you say breached a contract because, and you give reasons, that's the most important thing. You give your final opinion backed up with reasons. And if you've done all that and you've done it really well, then there's no reason you can't get a distinction. But make sure you cover what I've just said. You know, try and get it in 5 paragraphs. All these paragraphs are going to be, you know, fully developed paragraphs, which is a good skill to have when writing assignments. I don't want to see short little bullet point or half bullet point looking paragraphs. Make them nice and full and have the paragraph focus really concisely and powerfully on each element, especially your summary. You know, that's when you know, your closing argument. So I hope that helps everyone. I want you to, for those that have submitted, I want you to go back over your work and redo it if it doesn't fit with this, you know, what I've explained today. For those that haven't done any work yet on this, then you know, this will hopefully help you finish the assignment and upload. Okay, so any questions or problems, contact me on Teams. Okay, bye for now.